Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me on the Slice of Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Taylor. Today I'm joined by Bob Crutchfield, the CEO at TeleHealth Solution. Bob, how are you today?
Hey Jared, good. Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to talk today. I think we should kick things off. If you could give the audience a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk about your company.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I'm a lifetime healthcare guy. Have never done anything other than healthcare my entire career. I've done everything from startups on the provider services space when I was earlier in my career. I've done build and grow work as a VPGM at Cardinal Health, and then built and managed the pharmaceutical services division for US Oncology. And then after we sold US Oncology to McKesson, I got into venture capital as a general partner and worked for well over a decade as a general partner, had some success on the VC side, and wanted to get back into operations. So had an opportunity to join TeleHealth back in June of 2020 as an executive chairman, and really liked the company, liked the management team, loved the founder, Wasim Ghanem. Dr. Ghanem has a big heart, big vision for quality care and closing gaps in access to care, particularly for the most vulnerable patients that are in skilled nursing facilities and in these small rural acute hospitals. And so it's just a good fit for me.
It's interesting that you were in VC and then you transitioned back into operating. It seems like that happens, and I'm sure we lose a lot of great venture capitalists because they get the itch back and want to or my guess is it never leaves, right? It's a different thing. It kind of focuses on you're helping other people now build versus you building. But at the end of the day, it's probably why Tom Brady won't retire, right? And just doesn't want to be a coach. He does want to go and kind of drive the growth. And so it's interesting that you did that. I'd like to shift focus. So thank you for that great intro. Super helpful. Can we talk a little bit now about the company today, TeleHealth Solution? Can you give us I like to focus on three things: the why, how, what, and then we'll kind of go into some specific topics that you and I talked about that we want to dive into today.
Yeah, so I think the why is that virtual healthcare, telehealth, has traditionally been viewed as almost an alternative healthcare form, right? So in the skilled nursing environment, for many, many years, telehealth was a subscription-based model. We had, physicians who were on call. If a patient needed to be seen at a time when the local medical director or the primary care physician was not available, particularly nights and weekends, we would get that call at the last minute to try to stabilize a patient to avoid an ER transfer. The why today is that virtual healthcare is real healthcare. It's a technology-enabled provider services model, but it's still one provider taking care of one patient at a time. And so the beauty of what we're doing is that we believe that the care continuum for patients in skilled nursing facilities, where you don't have generally a medical doctor on site 24/7, and then in critical access hospitals, 25 beds or less, which are very rural, and then smaller rural hospitals, 100 beds or less. We believe that the care continuum should include virtual healthcare as a true point of care. We're reliable, we're predictable, and so we still are the same type of provider coverage as your providers are on the ground, but because we enter into the building or the hospital through a digital doorway, it allows us to move through time and space very efficiently. So, we're generally, after we receive a page, it's less than 5 minutes before we're having that encounter with the patient. Most of the time, it's less than 2. So that's the why, because there is a need for care, when patients are at the beginning of an episodic spiral, not at some level of maximum acuity where we're trying to manage a patient in a way that if we had gotten to touch the patient hours earlier, we could have avoided that ER transfer, but more importantly, we could have treated the patient in place, which is better for the patient, better for their families, and so overall we're improving the quality of care. But at the same time, by doing good with that increased quality of care, we can help the skilled nursing facilities and these acute care hospitals do well financially.
It's interesting, when I first started this podcast, their focus wasn't just on like digital health and like specifically telehealth, but it seems like that's where the majority of the innovation is coming from. So, it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with guests like you that are really continuing to, add to the innovation in this space and make it a better experience for all parties, right? I think ultimately when a solution, whether directly or indirectly, can touch the patients, the providers, these other healthcare organizations, that's when you're really onto something. So I'd be interested in kind of now shifting focus after that great why, how, what, so to speak. Could we talk about a little bit about how utilizing digital doorways, in your opinion, provides a new level of collaborative and integrative care?
Yeah, so I think, particularly where, you're in rural populations or rural environments where you just don't have the density of provider coverage, there is definitely a gap in access to care on a predictable basis, right? And so what the digital doorway does and what we're trying to build at TeleHealth, we're in our, we initially started out with hospitalists to provide, general practice type coverage for patients in, the post-acute space and the rural acute space. But today we're beginning to work on layering in behavioral health, cardiology, neurology. And so the ability for us to use that digital doorway to bring providers that could never be seen in person in these markets now to the bedside of that patient in a treatment environment that is very similar as if they were, in the physician's office. That's a huge, not only innovation, but it's solving a problem for patients in these communities that want to, stay where they live, work, and play. They want to receive their health care in the communities where they live. And so we see this as closing a gap and providing a higher quality of patient care and in some respects, a higher quality of life for these patients. And then we benefit in the partnerships that we're in with the acute facilities and the skilled nursing facilities.
What do you think needs to happen, I guess, from just an overall continued adoption from society, but also from a regulatory perspective to continue pushing this forward, right? I think the pandemic gave us it was definitely accelerated things a little bit as far as digital health is concerned. But I'd be curious about, what might be some roadblocks on those two areas, right? Overall adoption and then the regulatory, anything regulatory that could stop it from growing at the speed that it can.
Yeah. So, regulatory, I'll start there. In order for this to continue to scale, virtual healthcare, you've got to have the right CPT codes. You've got to have virtual healthcare recognized as real healthcare, and that the value that's being delivered for the patient is worth the amount of payment being provided to the provider. I mentioned early on that our original model was very subscription based, not a lot of fee for service, right? Today we do a lot of fee for service, and the directional pathway of our company from a revenue perspective is going to be built around fee for service revenue. And we love that because fee for service revenue allows us to collect the data that allows us to demonstrate to a client and their patients that we're actually providing value. And so we're a data driven company. We think data allows us to better manage the behaviors that are required for us to deliver, premium healthcare from a quality perspective. And then it gives our clients the ability to demonstrate, in their own shops, the value of virtual healthcare. So I think regulatory, you've got to have continued payment for virtual healthcare, and it's got to be recognized as a real point of care, a real point of care, not an alternative, not a safety net, but a real point of care. And then I think the data-driven approach, where we're able to demonstrate clinical data that shows that we're delivering a product from a healthcare perspective that is at least equal to, if not better than what happens when from a physical provider having to come into the building after being paged, 3 hours earlier or 2 hours earlier or an hour earlier. We think that those data will help demonstrate the viability of virtual healthcare as a real point of care. We don't want to replace anyone. We think that the providers on the ground are incredibly important, and they're important not only to the patients that they serve, but their communities. But there's not a deep density of providers in these small communities. And so we think we become, an enabling component for these providers as well. So that care continuum is very important to us. We don't want to replace anyone, but what we do want to be able to do is to close a gap in access to care for patients at the beginning of an episodic cycle, rather than, hours after the episodic downward cycle has begun. So, I think regulatory on coding and payments, and then data that demonstrates the value are going to be critically important. The barrier is that, this is a technology enabled, service. Our providers can't get to the patient unless they go through that digital doorway. So, great Wi-Fi coverage, in these small markets is a necessary component. 5G is going to help that a lot, but we've got to have good bandwidth to be able to do high quality video encounters with these patients.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things on those two fronts continue to, move forward. I think, as far as society goes, there might be more regulatory. You never know you can kind of guess, right, what's going to happen and follow it, but you never know. They could come out tomorrow and put something out that's great for the industry or something that's really bad. So hopefully it's good, but you never know.
Well, the data on utilization during the COVID era, during the COVID period, I mean, it's unbelievable how patients adopted and across all age spectrums. So I think virtual healthcare is, something that people recognize as being a valuable healthcare model. So I think that's going to be here to stay. And as a function of that, and because of the quality outcomes and data-driven, validation, I think we're going to continue to see regulatory payment, and there'll be stronger compliance standards on patient health information and HIPAA and other things, but we welcome that as well. So because we think that's important.
I think there's a couple, there's really great companies in this space. I am worried about, and you were on the VC side, so you've seen this. There's been a lot of funding into companies that I follow telehealth very closely. Not going to name any names, but it's like mind boggling. Like especially in the certain space, like there's some spaces within this digital health, like mental health. I could see lots of players in that, just because it's kind of, there's geographic focus, there's different parts of mental health and even parts on the non-mental health areas, but there's a lot of Me Too's out there too. And it'll be interesting to see, are they going to get gobbled up, or are they just going to get thrown by the wayside?
So I would say that there will be a number of, smaller companies that find a niche and can, try to hold on to it with, a very finite group of patients that they serve or facilities that they serve. But really in order to win and do it well, scale is a important component. And this is a hard business.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I still think we're pretty early, right? So we'll see what happens. Before we start to wrap up, another quick question for you. And this one's really great because I was in the healthcare staffing side of things for a while. And this was I used to always look at the stats that like the World Health Organization and some other organizations would put out, not just for the US, but globally. it's a crazy, the shortage of healthcare professionals across the board, not just physicians, but just every type of healthcare professional, how we're going to be short, and we're continuing to be short over the next couple of years and beyond. How can telehealth services help compensate for that shortage?
Yeah, again, I think it allows us, the shortages by and large, even though they're occurring in metropolitan areas, if you really look at where the deepest depth of the shortages are, they're in these underserved, smaller rural communities. And so for us, that's a high concentration of our sales efforts, and those are the communities we want to serve. So we think that the digital doorway will allow us to not only do medical doctor provider services, right, but we do a lot of work today with nurse practitioners, and we think that staffing with an RN is part of something that we will be looking at as we build out our product roadmap going forward. So we think we can transport high quality nurses, nurse practitioners, doctors, behavioral health professionals through the digital doorway from where they want to live and work, but to these underserved communities where the demand for these services is so high. So I think virtual healthcare is a requirement in many respects for that, expanded access to this type of quality multi-specialty care. I think that's where it's going to come from.
Well, let's hope it continues to help with the shortage and also just continuing to accelerate our healthcare structure forward. Yep. I want to thank you so much, Bob, for joining me on the podcast today. Hopefully we can have you on again soon to talk about some other topics, but really appreciate it. Thanks.
Hey, I'd love it, Jared. And thank you very much. I really enjoyed this.